much, Julia. And thank you for those that are here. I was asked to tell a transformational story, which is pretty easy for me to do because I did go through a major transformation in my business and my career. Now, just a caveat, if you're in HR and you have a seat at the table and you're a major partner in determining the trajectory of of your business, this doesn't apply to you. But if you're not, and you feel you're undervalued, or if you're just getting into the profession, as we just heard, let's talk about why and what to do about assuring that you're adding the value you want to. Like you, I wanted a career that positively impacted working people. And that's sort of how I fell into HR. I had lived in Ohio all my life, but dreamed of California, probably having seen many movies. And I got in my car and drove out, and 2 weeks later got an employee relations job. It was the first real HR job I'd had, and it was at a large aerospace company. At the time, it was the second largest employer in San Diego County. But I want to talk to you a little bit about that experience. First, a little bit about the culture. Now, this was, I don't want to give away how long ago it was, but let's say it's over 30 years ago. And I could tell you that the culture at that time was barbaric, pretty much. There were 8,000 people at the site, half were union. And while there were many, many, many good people in management, management was still relatively unsophisticated in terms of how to deal with people. Some examples of that is that every Monday there was what the employees called a walk of shame, where senior managers would walk the different plant floors and publicly call out anyone who wasn't performing in front of their team. And it was very demeaning for them, and I was powerless to do anything about it. The parking situation, there was a multi-class society group there. You had the senior level leaders who could park right next to the building. And by the way, the parking lot was huge, went out into the fields. But the senior management could park right up front, and they had 2 full-time employees that washed their cars and gassed them and kept them waxed and so on. And then anybody, no matter how long they'd been at the company, if they didn't have a manager title, they lined up at the front gate. They had to walk in from the North 40 and they'd line up, and then management could just ride right past them. So that's sort of, I could tell many horror stories, but I don't want to bore you with that. And I hope nobody has had that same experience. Secondly, about not just about the culture, but about my job and my training as an HR person. First of all, I was presented with a book of employment policies that was 2 inches thick. And I understood that my job was to make sure that these policies were followed. In addition to that, I was required to do compliance kinds of training that, of course, people love to come to. If there was an employee complaint, I was charged with doing investigations, very often not even talking to the person that was accused until after the investigation was done. I was a nag. I spent a fair amount of time following up on performance appraisals that were late and nagging management to get them in. Frequently, I was involved in disciplinary actions. So that's when I was brought in to make sure that the right kinds of threats were made and there was a clear understanding and the right documentation took place. And I was in a position where if there was someone that wanted a leader that wanted to follow an employee that was really a bad actor, if they hadn't done the right documentation, I could tell them no. Finally, I was involved in the layoffs that were fairly frequent, and the layoffs, I wasn't a part of the decision making, but I was the one who had to tell these people on a Friday afternoon that they didn't have a job on Monday. Not at all the job I had thought I would have and that I would want. It was really hard. It wasn't what I expected to do. However, It paid well. I was in San Diego, and there were opportunities for promotion. And after several years, I was the director of corporate training. So I at least felt positive about that, because then we were working with leadership on how they could be better in dealing with employees. My transformational time came and my real life changed when the company brought in a new director of labor and employee relations. His name was Ken, and he brought an entirely different approach to our role. His belief and experience was that the vast majority of people, and let's just call it 95%, the vast majority of good people were adults. They voted, they owned homes, they served in communities, they were parents, and only some small minority were bad apples. And when we very creatively call them 5%ers. And what I mean by that group of people is that they were out for themselves, they were untrustworthy, they were not a team player. Yet all of our policies were geared around trying to catch them. You know, policies like a probationary period where it's 90 days. Now, every 5%er knows how to count to 90. You know, there's the day before and the day after where, 5%ers were turning into a 3-day weekend for a holiday. But then a good person would get trapped in that and not get paid. Bereavement's one of my favorite policies, because I don't know how we've all decided that it takes 3 days to grieve, at least for payment purposes. And there's only so very close family we can grieve for. And some of the bereavement policies I've seen are absolutely barbaric. You have to bring a note from the funeral. There are lists of behavior rules, things that you probably wouldn't even say to children, but if you did, they were rules for children. But these behavior rules were being outlined for adults. There was attendance policies. And, again, look at the 5%er. There are a lot of point systems in operations. And by the way, I should say that a lot of my background comes from operations. Although we've worked in many sectors, that's the largest, and where we've seen the lowest hanging fruit. And the attendance policy, someone could miss, 19, 20 days a year and still have a job. My favorite maybe is the discipline policy, where we treat people worse, expecting them to get better. And another favorite is that, and this was my training, we must treat everyone the same. We must treat everyone the same. Otherwise, we could be liable for some sort of discriminatory practice. And, well, let me say more about that in a minute. So, I was learning that everything I'd been doing in the past and been trained to do was to focus on those bad apples. And under the guidance that I got from Ken, who came to our company, was that we focus on the good people and get rid of the bad ones as fast as you can. And he called this new approach Positive Employee Philosophy, or PEP. Now, this was 30 some years ago. The company expanded and opened new plants, and Ken made sure that they would not be like our Southern California plants. And he opened 5 of them with these kinds of elements. There was a careful selection of the plant manager who had servant leader type qualities and style. The operations employees, the first 5 or 6, hired all the rest of the employees, and they had the final decision in hiring their peers. And they hired people for attributes. Were you trustworthy? Would you have my back? Do you like to have fun? Are you reliable? Can I count on you? Those kinds of things. Everyone had a key to the building. There were no time clocks. Everyone was paid 40 hours a week. And if they were required by law to receive overtime, then they turned in a notice for that and were paid accordingly. There weren't a bunch of rules. There was one standard of conduct. And that one standard of conduct was that everyone is expected to act in the best interest of the company and its fellow employees. It's that simple. Discipline was replaced with a problem-solving approach that left sort of the final decision-making of, is this a job I really want to do, in the hands of the employee. Best yet, we reversed the treating everybody the same, and that we wanted to be fair. and fair isn't the same as equal. Final thing is, because we were dealing with adults, because we were dealing with good people, because we had positive assumptions about them, the leaders also had high expectations for performance, and that's precisely what they got. The good news for me is they required training because everyone was so used to the black and white rules, and now they're expected to use judgment. But, isn't that what we're paying leaders for anyway, is to use judgment? In any case, the bottom line is they outperformed the California plants by over 200%, had a waiting list of applicants. I couldn't go anywhere to lunch there. If they saw the badge I was wearing, they wanted to know how they could get in. The end of my story is in 1990, left the company to take this amazing approach and offering to as many companies as I could find that were interested. We've had a small, successful consulting business for the last 20 years, largely through referrals. Companies in the US that you might have heard of that are Dr. Pepper, Night Swift Transportation, Research Now, US Engineering. But that's talking about the why our field is not prized and sought and valued by some of our organization's leaders. And the why is, I believe, the role we've been assigned in our companies. HR was trained to mitigate risk. Our advice in learning how to mitigate risk came from lawyers who drafted lots of policies designed to try to catch the 5%ers. The thing is, they didn't. We often use the fear of litigation to get compliance from the leaders to do what we were trying to do, which was mitigate risk. When these are the goals of the job, you don't mean to, but you end up creating a culture that's demeaning to the majority of good people. Peel back the onion even more. We find ourselves dealing so often with employees, and in benefits and transactions, that's very understandable. But shouldn't their direct leaders be handling just about everything else? Isn't that who they should go to? And unfortunately, most of the employees we were dealing with were the 5%ers. I want to submit to you that our role is coach, facilitator, influencer, and advisor. Our target group is not the employee group. Our target group is the leadership. It's our job to prepare them to positively challenge their work teams and handle team member issues with good judgment and empathy. That's going to be essentially or especially important as we move into the future of work. I've written some articles on this. They're available on our website. And I hope that this has been helpful to you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Sue. That certainly was a vivid and sad, like you took us through the trenches there, but came out at least positive on the other side. Thank you so much for sharing your personal story with us. I want to open it up to the crowd here and see if there were any questions that Sue's stories brought up for you, whether it's to do with Teal, to do with Sue's experience, to do with her wisdom that she has been amassing over, 32 years in her business now. What have you got, folks? Again, you can either raise your hand. To do that, you go into reactions at the bottom of your screen, and there's a raise hand option there. I'll show you right now what that looks like. And then you can lower your hand. Or you can go ahead and type your question into the chat if that's what you prefer.
I should say, Julia, that when I first learned about Teal around the world, that Tim Erschinger, who was the one I was speaking to, said that I told him that we didn't quite get to Teal in what we do. We get really close to it. we're looking now at what we can do that takes us that one step further toward Teal. But frankly, we're working with organizations that the culture needs a lot of basic work right now, and certainly aren't prepared for the future.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like in some ways you're elevating an industry or a set of industries, because a lot of the work that you do is in the manufacturing or sort of blue collar space where things are not even that orange yet. I mean, like, those folks are stuck in amber. I'm not going to say red, but I don't know. But it does feel like an industry or a sector even that is not anywhere real close to Teal, right? I mean,
Right. It's
if we're thinking, yeah.
it's
So
not
and
close.
the way that you described what Ken was doing and how you approach your work, it sounds like it's maybe pulling folks closer to green. Is that fair to say? Like thinking about the culture, thinking about the person.
I think we get the organizations that are committed, visionary, and that we get to work with. I would say get to orange.
Mm,
I think we just need a little more education and sophistication in terms of getting to Teal. But I do think we definitely take organizations that are red. If we've got the right leader in place, that's courageous, that's willing to do things that are different. If we have that, we're able to move them through the approach that we take, which is great.
There are a couple of questions that are coming in, so we should go ahead and turn our attention over to them. So Deborah had a clarifying question, a really good one. You mentioned that fair is not the same as equal. Can you say a little bit more about what you meant by that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, at least, and words mean different things to different people. In our case, equal, and the way we were told to treat this from our human resource training and risk mitigation was to treat everyone the same. So that if someone would, if you had a 10-year employee who lost their temper a little bit and walked away and took 15 minutes off and then came back, and we would take a problem-solving approach to that. But if you were treating everybody the same and you had that disciplinary process, you wouldn't be able to just have that conversation. You'd have to have some kind of a write-up. But if it's a 2-day employee, I mean, it's not necessarily the same thing. The circumstances may be different. It's getting involved and digging into what are the circumstances and who are we dealing with, and what's been their contribution. And we are willing to use as a standard that if we can explain why we treated this person this way in this situation and treated somebody else differently in a similar situation, if we can explain that rationally so that any reasonable adult could understand it, then we feel comfortable with it because we think that's doing the right thing. Does that help?
It makes a ton of sense to me, Sue. And it reminds me of something that I heard. I wasn't able to go to Susan Basterfield's talk earlier today, but I heard from a colleague that she talked about the difference between policy and principles. And I heard very similar notes from you when you talked about the standard of conduct that you were able to conceive instead of a thick rule book by which everybody, as you were just saying, has to be held to the exact same behavioral standard versus maybe moral standard or outcome standard.
Julie, I have a defining moment on that question. When I was working in the aerospace company and I was an employee relations rep, and this was before Ken got there, we had all these rules, and one of the rules was you couldn't touch, physically touch another employee. We had a gentleman there who was a chief in engineering. He'd worked his way up. He used to be he worked on a railroad when he was 18, and his arm got caught in a coupling and he lost his arm. And as a result, his other arm became more powerful. And he was trying to talk with a project engineer who had, a couple degrees, and trying to explain why something couldn't be done. And he was treated very disrespectfully by this guy, who turned and walked away. And in order to try to get him to still talk, he reached out and grabbed his arm. Well, I guess the strength was such. Anyway, this project manager went to the medical doctor and said, he bruised me, he touched me. Well, this is a termination offense. And it's a 40-year employee who was, there was provocation, he was disrespectful, and even yet he wasn't trying to engage in any kind of physical harm. And we fought that case from a human resource standpoint. It went all the way to the top because he was supposed to be fired. And I was sitting in a room with him while we were waiting for the decision to come down. And he had tears rolling down his face. And he said, 40 years, I don't want to go out like this. This company's been my life. I mean, those are the kinds of things, he ended up getting by with a written warning, which was an exception to the policy, maybe for his 40 years and his good work. But that's the kind of thing that, if you go by the policy and you don't look at the circumstances and you don't look at every aspect of it, you can make a decision that isn't the right one.
Yeah, that's a super powerful story. And it just reminds me how when we try to put all of the boundaries and all of the rules around something, it dehumanizes that thing. It literally turns it into more and more of a machine of
Yes.
just a set of yes, no, versus something that has a soul. We're going to pivot a little bit and address Rachel's question about how you determine whether a client, presumably an HR client, is one that you want to work with. How do you determine if they will truly embrace more modern policies and behaviors that treat employees as humans versus property they own?
Well, I guess I could say that having been in this field for a long time, in one conversation, I can almost tell, and I understand that their training may have been very much the same as mine. And so it's not really the HR folks that I worry so much about when we don't want to take on an assignment with a client. It's because we think the senior leadership is flawed. If we can see that they're just trying to check a box, that they want to say they've done this or they've done that, and I can tell that they don't have any real value for people, they don't view people as their key asset. If we can tell that, we don't want to work with them because it's not going to be effective and it'll be undermined, and we'll create a brand new group of cynics who think there's another flavor of the month.
So how does it work for your company? What's sort of like the process of going from prospect to client? And even before prospect, do folks come to you based on your reputation? Do you meet them in industry events? Like, give us a little peek into the day-to-day of Sue Bingham and company.
Well, let me be really clear. We pretty much suck at sales. We are all about the client. We are all about the organization. We're all about the people and wanting to do the right thing. I think because of that, we've shown up positively and gotten the kinds of results from leaders that they were looking for at some pretty senior levels. And I'd say 90% of our work comes from referrals. Referrals from people who've been through our workshop. We've been doing workshops for over 25 years, a leadership workshop, and it changes people's mindset and it changes how they feel. And I think that's what they may go on. They may become, disenfranchised, their company changed leadership or something didn't happen. They weren't able to make any headway other than within their own group. They couldn't influence outside of that. So they leave and go to try to find another company where they can be more influential in the culture. And those are the people that call us as well. So it's mostly referrals, and plus we publish a lot. We do a lot of writing that goes into Harvard Business Review or Fast Company, things like that. And we will get calls because of that.
I love it. I'm going to go to Deborah's question next, and then Martin, I see you. I'm not going to miss you. But since we're on the topic still of specifically HR, the title of the session is Why HR Isn't Highly Valued. I think we've gone around this question a number of ways, but let's tackle it head on. Sue, why do you think this is so?
I want to be clear. I don't think it's the people. I think it's the role that we've been expected to fill within organizations. That's a lot more black and white, a lot more policy driven, a lot more risk mitigation. And I think that when you operate that way, management isn't, knocking down your door for your advice. You're the impediment. You're keeping me from firing the guy I want to fire. A common phrase is, well, HR told me that's the way we had to do it, or HR wouldn't let me. It's those kinds of phrases that happen. And I don't think this applies to a lot of HR professionals in companies, and certainly not in doing the kind of consulting work that we do. But there's enough, and the training continues to be focused on compliance and risk mitigation. And, they're still teaching the discipline process. And I don't see lots of barriers being broken there. And until the senior leadership redefines the role of HR, I think we're going to have to struggle, because we're stuck in a job that most people don't want, and most people don't like, the people we support don't value.
So when you take on a client, is one of your goals to create a redefinition within the bounds of that organization for what HR is and what it's responsible for?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we do a lot of train the trainer and those kinds of things, because we may spend 2 years. The longest we've spent with one company has been 8 years now, this very large company. But we want to leave the company at some point, certainly, and that the company is stronger as a result and can carry on and can perpetuate the philosophy and the organizational work that is just so profitable. It's just so successful. And people line up to work there. They're not struggling with, a company we will have worked with won't be struggling with, what do I do about this flexible workplace? How do I handle this? We just had a group of leaders in a workshop say that, every manager ought to be talking with their team and saying, how do we meet our objectives? What's the best way to do it? What do you guys think? How do we put it all together so that we can all be our most productive and exceed our expectations? I mean, not a policy of, well, we'll be in 2 days a week and 3 days you can work from home. But many companies are struggling to still do that. And that's where we need our HR people to say, wait a minute, that's not helpful. You're not taking advantage of the fact that people have different work cycles, that some people work better at home, some people work better at the workplace. And how do we find the best view of that? And the best way to do that is ask them. So I don't know. I think it's simple, but I think we've got a lot of people making it complex.
Exactly.
I'm curious, based on based on your definition of where HR should play and how the real customer for HR should be the leadership of the organization, and that they should be playing that coach role. You said coach, facilitator, advisor. And the real work of supporting humans actually lands with managers, right?
Yes,
So
absolutely.
what does that mean? And does it mean anything for like the ratio of HR people to employees? Does that mean there are fewer folks in the people department, in the HR department?
I think it sort of depends on not necessarily the employees, but the ratio of HR to leaders, and again, what's expected of their role. A lot of companies are turning to outside coaches now. When they've got people in-house, they could probably be using, and they're paying more money for that. So that's I think that we should be, I don't think the number is important. I think what's most important is having a very clear, defined vision of what results and what value, being able to express it, including in measurements, real clear value of what you're bringing to the organization. And certainly in HR, you can measure that in retention, because people leave their bosses most often. You can measure it in retention. You can measure it if you've got the right hiring processes. And we're big believers in frontline employees hiring and making the final decision on frontline employees. We cut turnover by 50% within the first 6 months every time. So, and they get a higher quality of employee because they're not going to, they're unlike the supervisors or managers who are trying to fill a hole, they want someone they can count on. So they have much higher expectations, and they'll turn people down and work harder as a result.
Yeah.
That's excellent. Okay, Martin's question. Thank you for going down that rabbit hole with me. But Martin's question is, why, in your opinion, are organizations still focused on mistakes? Is it a mindset that says you're not enough? Because this mindset is set in every aspect of our life, family, education, school, vocational trainings, that we have to overcome. Is it a
Ask me the
mindset
question, why are we focused so much on,
on mistake?
On mistake? The problem with that is, and I can sort of speak to that, because 30 or 40 years ago, the whole mantra was that you need to do things right the first time. You needed to perfect them. And if you didn't, it required rework, and rework equaled cost. So at that time, when competition wasn't that great, cost was a major factor, and you wanted to reduce costs, so you wanted to get it right the first time. In this era of constant dramatic change, it's important that we have speed. And speed doesn't mean getting it right the first time. Speed means get a minimal viable product, get it out there, find what works, tweak what doesn't, scrap it and start with a new one. But we should have a mindset of experimentation. And that means fail faster. In fact, I've had some people say, when I say fail faster has replaced do it right the first time, they say, well, we shouldn't use the word fail. Well, there's nothing wrong with the word fail. We all fail at things. Let's stop worrying about that, and let's just get out there as fast as we can. And if you think about the iPhone, which I understand is now in the iPhone 13, something like that. Well, they didn't wait till they had an iPhone 13, Apple didn't, to get the iPhone out. They just continually made it better, but they got out there fast. And that's what companies are going to have to do. And that means that they have to get rid of a culture of fear, get rid of that culture of failure, embrace the mindset of experimentation. And that takes that's a different leader than probably a lot of people have worked for in their work lives.
Yeah, I love that. I was curious, Sue, to come back to another side of a certain set of decisions that usually land with HR. And I want to get your take on compensation. So you just talked through the paradigm shift of getting the frontline employees to hire their colleagues. What about compensation decisions? Are there changes to that you're propagating or maybe seeing on the horizon?
On the horizon, I think it's going to be experimental. I think there are going to be a number of versions, and it's going to be what works in what particular sector and so on. I think what's going to be important is for organizations to listen to what it is people are looking for. You know, we know that at least one generation is more interested in having a flexible work schedule than they are in making the most amount of money. So it's really going to be different. I think that's still an area of expertise that human resources has and uses in combination with leadership's judgment of performance and what goals have been set and so on. I don't right now. That doesn't mean it won't happen. I don't right now see people engaged in that. I do believe in peer performance feedback and all those kinds of things. And I hope they may very well be involved. It's just not something that I've seen much of. Have you? Anybody here?
We were just talking again with a couple of colleagues of mine about a different session where a couple of the speakers were talking about a paradigm where every month they, along with all of a project team, would sit down and talk through tell stories about their contributions and the contributions of others, and then kind of, I'm not sure if it's voting or allocating points, but decided every month who gets how much from that project. So, and that is extraordinarily Teal. And
Mhm.
I understand again that you're still working your way
We're
up.
still working our way. We're still working our way there. We are.
But yeah, it's definitely, it's probably the most touchy subject other than perhaps removal altogether, right? But money is a hard thing to crack.
Yes, but it's, I think it also needs to be considered in balance with all the other attributes of the organization. I know one of the questions we ask in our workshop, because one of our elements is competitive wages and benefits. It needs to be competitive. Our point is to make it not an issue, not a negative issue. And we'll ask, how many of you could go somewhere else and make more money? And if everybody doesn't raise their hand, we tell them they should. I mean, it may take some longer, may not take some, but if you want to make more money, and most people raise their hands, we say, well, if you can make more money somewhere else, why don't you? And then they go through all the things and reasons why they're staying where they are, and they're happy where they are, and they're satisfied where they are. So, what I like about compensation as it stands today is it's pretty market driven and it's pretty data based, and that if it's not in the hands of peers, it's in the hands of management. It's of course subjective to some degree, but if you've got a system that's based on data, you can explain rationally to someone why they're where they are, and coach them into where they might need to go if they want to increase the amount of income they have.
Thank you. Any other questions, folks? Got my compensation question answered. I wonder how much you encounter the sort of like diversity, equity, and inclusion work that is currently hopefully gaining more and more steam over the last couple of years, if that has started to become more part of the work that you do with your clients, or if you're seeing that as a separate sort of like direction that some companies may be taking, others not. What's your experience with it?
Sort of depends on if the company needs a real focus on it. You know, what we preach is doing the right thing. We preach should have positive assumptions about people, that everybody deserves trust and respect, that if you want to create a culture, you want to create a culture of commitment, not one of compliance. That demands the kinds of inclusion and the use of diversity. For instance, the leader of the future, and we're teaching this right now, giving them a tool, needs to be able to harness diverse opinions and needs to be able to do it in such a way that there's not a conflict, but there's a melding of that. And that's fairly easy to do. They can do it if they've got the right motivation to do that. So I don't know. I don't want to see it end up like a program. Although I think sometimes you need to do some kind of an intervention to get the focus. But my goal is that the kind of leaders we're trying to create are not ones that are going to fight or work against that.
Yeah, I'm sure it also does go back in some part to the types of leaders you end up working with, right? So there's natural selection.
I'm sorry, I've got to tell you something funny. I had a CHRO at a very, very large company. No. It was a senior VP at a very large company in the IT department. And we were talking and he said, hey, I was wondering what you'd say. My HR department called me and we've got a diversity inclusion program, and my department is ranked the best. And they're asking me what it is I'm doing. He said, I'm just hiring really good people. And yet that's, that he was the best at it. And if you knew this guy, you'd know that's just the way he is. So I think, I think it's leaders that don't see those barriers, that see diversity as a value, not as an obstacle.
Yeah, it's a slow road, but we'll all get there. I hope. I trust.
I'll keep looking at it.
Thank you. On behalf of America, I suppose. Are you guys international at all, or do you work mostly in the US?
We've done some, and it's been really wonderful, because what happened is we were dealing with leaders from a number of different countries, including China and India and Germany and France and Australia and England. And they had sort of been fighting against each other because the corporation had changed ownership from one country to another. And, there were just some of those battles that existed. But when they went through our workshop, they all found a common language with high performance workplaces, with HPWP. They found a common language that they all could agree to. And it took so much of the conflict right out of it.
That's beautiful. I'm starting to want to take your workshop myself, Sue.
Thank you.
Deborah has a question about your past work in the aerospace business. At what point did you sense that the culture was changing and that what you were doing was actually hitting the spot?
Once the new plants were opened, and were started up to be totally different in terms of their management, their approach. As soon as those plants were starting, you saw the results. Now you would think if a corporation saw that here's a model that just transcends performance. I mean, it's fast, it works, it's profitable, it's efficient, there's no turnover to speak of, there's no absenteeism to speak of. You would think they would say, well, we got to do that. But that's not the case. Legacy companies are really rooted in this is the way we've always done it. At least this legacy company was. And I left because I knew there would be no change from a corporate standpoint. But those plants flourished, really flourished and were exceptional. And that was 25 years ago, so I can't speak to where they are today, but I saw what it could be. And I saw that the corporate organization I was with, at least I didn't see any kind of change there. And so I wanted to take this wonderful philosophy and approach to other companies.
I'm curious, after Ken came in, what was that timeline like from change in leadership to when you felt like the plant was really like running on rails?
Boy, it happened fast, Julia. It really happened fast. His approach is, this is just no game for snails. He is, make it happen, do it now. What's getting in your way? One of the characteristics that made him so effective and made him such a wonderful mentor for me is that he was fearless in an environment that was really pretty fearful. Mm-hmm. And he worked with what's the right thing to do for people, because doing the right thing for people is the right thing for the business. And it's just that simple. But not everyone gets it.
So
timeline. You asked me timeline.
No, I'm just so curious. Was it like 2 months later and everybody's like, this is the best place to work on earth? Or how did it?
I would say it was probably a good 6 to 9 months, when you're staffing those plants and you're doing the leadership training and selecting the right folks. And I would say it took time to do that. Plus there was technical training involved, because the point was to hire great people of great character. And it wasn't focused on what previous experience or skill level did they have. It was, we're going to hire great people because we're going to train them to work within this plant. I mean, that's an obvious investment we want to make. So it took some time, but I'd say, 18 months, the results were showing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly also in that industry, that's massively fast.
But it's a startup. A startup is so different from a transformation. And we've done a number of both. And the startups are a piece of cake. It's just fun.
So was that just a new plant that y'all started with Ken, or did Ken come into an old plant and have to change the culture there?
Both. Those of us that really believed that he was absolutely on the right track and followed him, we tried to incorporate as many of the elements of positive employee philosophy in our day-to-day interactions as we could. But we were still bound by policies and organizational habits where there was resistance to that, including within the HR department. So really, I didn't think there was much opportunity for change. I don't think he did either. I'm not sure, but we were involved in a couple of plants that were changes, and subsequently after Roar, most of the work that our group has done has not been startups, it's been transformation, and that's a much longer road.
Yeah. And Ken was, what role did Ken have? Was he the GM of the plants that y'all started up?
Well, what's really interesting is he was the chief labor negotiator. But he believed in win-win and respecting the union and respecting the employees. And so he was that, and he was over all of employee relations.
Right.
So he's actually on this call. So I hope I'm answering these things correctly. He hasn't put his head in his hands yet. And the reason he's on this call is because 7 years after I left that company, we got married. So we've been doing this together for quite some time, and he retired a few years ago.
My God, I love that. What a twist.
Yeah. It's pretty wonderful. Yeah.
That is such a cool, y'all, I'm just as surprised as you are, unless you're Ken, in which case you're not surprised. Very cool. Well, that feels like a really good place to wrap up. I know we've got 5 more minutes. I don't want to shoot anyone down. If anyone else has questions or comments or anything you'd like to share.
Please feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to answer questions or help any way that we can with others who are trying to make those changes. And you can find out about us on our website, which is hpwpgroup.com.
I love it. Martin just threw one last lob over, and I do think it's a lob because this feels very much in line with what you do. But Martin asks, are organizations open to the findings of neuroscience that roughly say, if you create an environment of belonging and growth and treat employees as entrepreneurs, think good things will happen. And if there are companies that are open to these findings, how do they integrate them into their HR processes?
Well, one of the nice things about what we do is that it's a system for execution and implementation. And I think it really, I think there are those that are very open. And I'm not quite sure, again, remember I told you we're really terrible at sales and marketing and stuff like that. So I'm sure that there'd be a pretty good way to find those that are really into the neuroscience of that. I certainly believe that completely. We just make ours a little less technical when we talk about positive assumptions about people. And we base everything off of that on positive assumptions about people. Because if you have positive assumptions about people, you will naturally act in a more trusting way, in an inclusive way, in an encouraging way, a positive way. But if you've got negative assumptions about people in general, just because you've had negative experience or you've got a low trust orientation, I mean, that's going to get in your way. And it's going to require, something of a mindset change. And however the various ways we can find to get there to do that, I'm all for.